It's 7 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, so you know what time it is. It is time for your weekly episode of SCV Chat. I'm your host for the evening, Moose. And before we get started, please remember, the views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the SCV, its GEC, nor Divisions, Brigade, Camps, or any other subsidiaries. Now, we got a stacked show for y'all tonight. We have an awesome guest. We have Carl. That's all we need to say about Carl. And, of course, we're going to start the show off with some breaking news. Joined with me to talk about this breaking news is our Commander-in-Chief, Jason Boshiers, otherwise known as my father.
Well, you say there, son. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Dad.
Appreciate y'all letting me come on the show. I'm only going to be on for just a few minutes because I'm going to jump off, and I want to enjoy Carl with his guest and the whole book review. I'm really looking forward to that. But we had something happen Friday that I want to talk about because even on Thursday night when we had our look around the Confederation, when we talked about tooting our own horn, and we talked about when we do something and when we have victories, we had a victory. We had a good, solid, strong victory in Nashville, Tennessee. There was a Confederate monument that was in Centennial Park in Nashville, and there had been a petition to move it. As we all know, that has been happening all across our Southland. We have a Heritage Protection Act that's here in Tennessee. It was put in 2013, and it was modified in 2016 to put a little bit more effect into it. And to move it, they have to get a waiver from the Tennessee Historical Commission. And there was a straw poll taken. We all know what a straw poll is. It's just, okay, what's everybody's feelings before we have the discussion. And there was, with the straw vote, it was 21-1. The one person was thinking that they needed to be granted the waiver. 21 people believed that the monument needed to stay where it was. And we had, I hope everybody here knows or has heard the name of Ed Phillips. Ed Phillips is the attorney. He was the attorney for the Forrest family. He was the attorney on this case. And Ed Phillips always does a great job, and he did a fantastic job with this. Him and I have talked quite a bit since then, and we were talking about the motions that he went through and how he wanted to fight this fight. And he talked. And as y'all know, if you were, or you've watched the video of the forestry interment, or if you were at the forestry interment, Ed Phillips can talk. But he can be extremely, when he needs to, he can surmise something down and drill a point home. And he did with this. He didn't go into a 15 or 20 minute talk or 30-minute talk. It's like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and it was bang, bang, bang. And then when they had the vote, it was unanimous to deny the waiver. So 22 people, even the one that dissented and thought that it needed, even they backed away from it after hearing all of the evidence on it. And I want to thank Ed Phillips for doing a great job on that. I also want to thank the members of the Tennessee Historical Commission. There's been upheaval in all of this lately, and that was one of those things. Before all this come up, nobody ever went to a historical commission meeting unless they had something particular on. And the last ones that they have been having, especially all of those before COVID, that have a full room of everything that was going. But I also want to thank Frank Heathman. He's his ancestor fought and his name is on that monument, and his ancestor was part of the bivouac that raised the money to put it up. I want to thank him. He did a great job. Adam Southern was there, and he did a great job. So we had Ed Phillips there, Adam Southern, and Frank Heathman. And those three did a great job, handled it all wonderful, and we won. And it was a unanimous victory, and it was a big victory. And the one thing I'm going to ask you to do is share this news, because people say, well, what are you doing? We never win anything. Well, I agree that sometimes we have the deck stacked against us. But I also know that if we continue to fight, and we fight the right way, we stop taking the swords to each other, we stop all of that. And we don't, this whole death by 1,000 cuts, we're going to end up killing ourselves if we keep on going after each other like this. But if we will stand together and we will fight as one cohesive unit, these are the kind of things that we can do when we have the right people, put the right people in the right place at the right time, and work hard, stick together, and continue to fight. And that was what this was. This was not just an overnight deal. This took a lot of work, a lot of talk, a lot of talking, and a lot of thought. And I just wanted to put that out there. You should have seen the announcement. The announcement come out on the Telegraph. If you're not on the Telegraph, send your, that's it right there. Send your email address to membership@scv.org. and tell them that you want to be on the Telegraph, and they'll put it, and you can start seeing these. So promote this, talk about it. It's on. It's out there. It's on the Telegraph. You're hearing it here on SCV Chat. Next time you go to a camp meeting, talk to your camp members about this and show that yes, we can have victories if we will just fight. The other thing that I want to talk about, then I'm going to get off, and that is a quick update on the Arlington deal. Still can't go into any details, and I'm working with Ed Phillips on that as well. And there's several other people involved. But what I want to talk about this is SCV, the GEC, voted to initiate a lawsuit, and that is what's being pursued now. Yes, Kennedy twins, promote, drive our victories home. It's one of those things, bad news happens and it's everywhere. We have a small victory somewhere and nobody talks about it. So talk about it. But getting back to the Arlington deal, we being the National Sons of Confederate Veterans voted to initiate a lawsuit concerning the removal of the Reconciliation Monument in Arlington. Now, other individuals and other organizations are filing lawsuits as well. And I know that there have been people that have been asking, what about making donations? If it's your money, you spend your money to whatever you want to spend it to. But if you're going to make a donation, consider doing it. If you're a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, consider giving your donation to the Sons of Confederate Veterans, since we will be in the fight as well. And there is, if you go to scv.org/PayPal-donations and go to the Heritage Operations button and leave a donation there. I know that these other organizations are out there. I know they're solicited money. I have had them contact me to see if I wanted to donate money to their fight in Arlington. I'm giving my money to the SCV to do the fight, and I get it. I realize everybody is wanting to jump in, or a lot of people are wanting to jump in. But if you remember the Sons of Confederate Veterans, National voted to get into the lawsuit, and that's one of the other questions. Is National going to be in the lawsuit? Yes. There's already been discussions. There's going to be some papers that's going to be handed down. So make a donation. And if you do it and you're an SCV member, consider giving it to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And yes, I was solicited. I was asked, hey, would you give a donation to this organization so they could do the Arlington lawsuit. And I said, I'm contributing through and giving to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. So I just want to confirm with everybody that, yes, we're going to be involved, and it is your money. You can spend it any way that you want to. But if you're an SCV member and you want to give it to us, thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Commander, for coming on. Always a pleasure to have you on. Before we go to a sponsor break, our host for tonight has an announcement he wanted to make.
No, I didn't want to make an announcement at this point. I wanted to ask the Commander-in-Chief, would it not be necessary when you send your donation to specify what you want that money to go to?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
If you're sending money to support this lawsuit, which I wholeheartedly encourage you to do, make sure, because the Heritage Defense budget can go to a number of things, but if you want it to go to that lawsuit, just make sure if you mail a check in snail mail or whether you do it online through PayPal or whatever, make sure and specify exactly what you want to go towards. You
are correct, and thank you for providing more details on that. I'm trying to get off quick because I want to hear your stuff, but yes, you are correct. You will need to specify where you want it to go. And if you want it to go to the Arlington lawsuit, put in there it's for the Arlington lawsuit. Whereas if you just want it to go to regular Heritage operations, you can make a donation to that as well. Forest Last Ride, whatever you want to do. It's your money.
And we encourage those donations because, look, you know, all of the money coming into Heritage Ops is going to go towards Heritage Ops. It cannot go anywhere else. Can't.
That is correct. That is correct. People have asked about that. And if money comes, if you donate something to something, that's what it's going for. We can't just say, okay, we've got some extra money here. Let's move it from there to there.
Right.
We can't do that. You know, we can't, because right now we're going through an audit, and the audit takes months. And this is something that would come out in the audit. So we cannot do that. Now, the one thing that I do want to tell you is, and we talked about this on Thursday night, because people donated money for the preservation and the work done on the historic home of Elm Springs. When we reached a certain amount of money and there was work to be done, we're now taking bids on doing that work inside the big parlor as you go in, because we're not going to have those funds and just set them there. If you donate to something, we need to use your money, because that's why you donated it. You didn't donate it for it just to sit there. You donated for it to be used. And when the use comes up, that's what it will be used for. I'm going to be quiet. And Carl, I do like your hat. Make America states again.
I love it too.
Hey, look, I have to give our buddy Travis Archie in the Missouri division, I pronounced that right, for my brothers up there, credit for this hat. I think he's the one I kind of co-opted that slogan from. And then I had a friend make me a hat that said that.
I love it.
Yeah, I like that. All right.
To answer a quick question, and then we'll get into tonight's program. Yes, when you go to make a donation, you will go on to scv.org, PayPal donations. You'll go down to Heritage Defense, you'll click that, and then it'll have a subject line underneath it, and you would put the Arlington lawsuit. So yes, that's how you would do it. It says either subject line or has a memo underneath it. I can't remember which one it's called, but it will be there. So just go to scv.org/PayPal donations, or you can just go to scv.org, scroll down a bit and click donations, or you can follow the link that's in the chat now. And of course, this announcement will be posted on SCV Chat's Facebook page after the ending of tonight's show. And without further ado, we're going to get into our early Pop Tarkin sponsor break, and we're going to kick it over to our host, Carl. And tonight's sponsor is brought to us by the Kennedy twins' most recent book, Jefferson Davis, The High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government. Let me look at this beautiful cover real quick. Isn't that just a beauty? Jefferson Davis's High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government is about how Jefferson Davis was a leader into the high road of emancipation. He looked for a day in which slaves would be prepared to live within and participate in society. He did more than advocate for the high road to emancipation. He practiced his belief in the ultimate emancipation of Southern slaves. Many of his former slaves left for prosperity, and their testimony about their former master who prepared them for freedom and being a self-made, sustaining member of society. You can get this book at www.kennedytwins.com or most online bookstores. Link for that is also in the chat. We want to thank the Kennedy Twins for sponsoring tonight's Pop-Tart break. And without further ado, we're going to get into a commercial break, and we'll be right here with Carl Jones.
There is a place nestled in the rolling farmland of southern Middle Tennessee. A home constructed in 1837, nearly lost to the ravages of war. Saved by a servant and a Confederate general. A place where families loved and lost. If walls could talk, what stories could be told? If a place, a home, can feel love, loss, pain, surely this is one of those places. Nearby is a more recent structure, and inside are the stories of heroes and heroines, stories of battles won and lost, stories of sacrifices made by the people of its native soil. A place that will tell the true and complete story of the Southland and the war fought for its freedom. From the causes that led to the conflict to the modern-day struggles to protect Southern history. Historic Elm Springs and the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs are the general headquarters for the Sons of Confederate Veterans. A place where the story of the Southland and its historic struggle is preserved and told. Come and discover your history.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Moose, where'd you go, man? I thought you were going to be on.
I disappeared into the abyss.
Here he comes. I was telling you, we have a new sponsor. I got a rather dubious package in the mail today. Pop-Tarts. No, Pop-Tarts are not the sponsor. It was, oddly enough, the package was addressed to my office, but with the simple name Conroe on it. It just said Conroe. And it was sent from the son of Harold Philpott. And he put a message in there that I'm sorry, Dad lost all of the family's money in trying to start up a door-to-door meat delivery service while he was on oxygen and in a wheelchair, and it didn't take off very well. But I can keep y'all supplied with Pop-Tarts. So thanks to the son of Harold Philpott for that.
Yes, thank you very much. I do like a good Pop-Tart.
He said strawberry and cinnamon flavored.
I'll take the strawberry. We can give Conroe the cinnamon.
Conroe will have to fight me over the cinnamon.
Fair enough. We'll do it by football rules. We'll get everybody in a big circle.
Yeah.
All two will just have to clash into each other over and over again until someone falls.
Okay, enough silliness. We got a guest on tonight. my good friend Dave and I have been friends a long time, man. I was thinking about it today. We've known each other on Facebook for quite a while.
And, yeah, that's right, man. I actually don't know how we originally met there, but it might be close to a decade. Thanks for having me. Thanks for.
I think it goes back to about 2009, 2010, actually. And I'll tell y'all something, everybody listening, about Dave, is when I get stumped on a constitutional question, he's the guy that I go to. There is, not a better historian out there that I'm aware of than this guy. So I'm really happy to have him on the show tonight. He was going to be on last month, but he got tripped up and had a conflict and wasn't able to come on. So we got him on this month, and we're really happy to have him. He's got actually 3 books out now, right?
I do, yeah. I have Compact of the Republic, the League of States, and the Constitution. It's a defense of the decentralized nature of our political system. At least it should be, right? And then I wrote a book on the 14th Amendment, and my most recent is a biography on Thomas Paine called Thomas Paine, A Lifetime of Radicalism. So thanks for having me.
And I've read Compact of the Republic. I've read the book on the 14th Amendment. Forgive me, I don't recall the title of it. And they were excellent. I have not read the book on Thomas Paine, but really, Dave he's when it comes to colonial history and constitutional history, legal history, I hate to pin him down as a historian, because he's pretty solid in the philosophy of freedom as well. And even though I know he lived a time up in Yankee land, he's one of us. He's home.
Don't judge me for that.
He's home in Nashville now. And I think we've met a few times. We've been friends on Facebook a long time, but we've met several times. One at an SCV camp meeting, and a couple times at he comes to the Forest Boyhood Home Celebration. And
down in Chapel Hill, man, that was a great experience last time.
So let's go right into it, man. Tell us about Thomas Paine. Give us a little background on who he was, how he got interested, because he was not, if I remember correctly, he was not actually an American, right?
That's right. Paine was an Englishman. He was born in a small town in the east part of England called Thetford, to essentially a poor tradesman. His father built stays. What stays were, where they were kind of the structural underpinnings of women's corsets. And this is a fact that some of his political adversaries would make fun of him for down the line. Pretty poor. He stood out a lot from the American aristocrats that kind of took part in the American Revolution. The biggest names we know, like Washington and Jefferson, Madison, etc. He came to the United States after dabbling in several different weird trades. He was actually a tax collector, believe it or not, for a time. He collected taxes on behalf of the English government as an excise officer. And during his time as a tax collector, we think that he discovered his most radical political ideas. And what those were at the time was the fact that we wouldn't have to live under monarchy, that monarchy was immoral. Also that slavery was a cruel injustice that had to be rejected. He was an abolitionist before abolitionism was popular for the most part, though there were some in his time. He also believed that religion and government should be totally separated. And all these things were about the most radical things imaginable. Another profession that he dabbled in was privateering. A lot of people might not know this, but before nations developed kind of modern navies, a lot of kind of the naval clashes that occurred, especially in the War of 1812, the American Revolution, etc., took place on private frigates that were ostensibly kind of sanctioned by the government, but taken into private operation. He almost died. He nearly died in one venture that his father begged him to not go on. There was a ship called the Terrible, commanded by Captain William Death. That was a great name, right? Well, that ship clashed with a French frigate during the French and Indian War, or as it was known in Europe as the 7 Years' War, killing almost all of the crew, but Paine didn't go along. He eventually came to America on the endorsement of Benjamin Franklin, and at the time, Benjamin Franklin was probably the most famous person in the world on both sides of the Atlantic. Getting a recommendation letter from him would be like getting a recommendation letter from, say, Elon Musk today. So he was pretty much the most unlikely banner waver to carry the torch of independence. But what's interesting to me about him and how it could link to your organization is Southerners loved Paine, especially George Washington and Charles Lee. They were two of the first readers of Common Sense, really his pivotal treatise, his sensation that really brought the colonial struggle against England to the common person in a digestible way. Charles Lee and Washington actually wrote several times in private correspondence saying, hey, have you guys gotten a load of this? Have you read Common Sense? It's amazing. He befriended especially James Monroe and Thomas Jefferson, the latter of which was probably one of his best friends throughout the duration of his life. But there's so much about Paine to know and love, and that's, I guess, where I'll stop. I've talked enough right now. So.
No, that's fine. Keep going. So he was clearly a big supporter of American independence. And you mentioned his friendship with Washington and with his admiration for Southerners. What was it specifically about him that they admired? I mean, how did he become so popular in the South?
I think the cavalier spirit of Virginia that, as you know, goes back so long kind of resonated with Paine, and both he and some of the people that are so widely appreciated now by us, like John Randolph of Roanoke and Thomas Jefferson, were all Lockeans. They really believed that Locke had the best take on the social compact theory, and that's that, governments are set up to protect life, liberty, and property, and when they cease to do that, they fail to do that, or they do more than that, the people can rise up and alter and abolish it. And that was an incredibly radical construct, but it was one that resonated with, the colonial Virginia government in particular, where Lord Dunmore was essentially kicked out. Patrick Henry raises the militia and, gets Virginia, the most important state, involved in the most important struggle of North America in the time. But Paine was he was so much different than the aristocratic class of, Southern gentlemen in some ways, because he was a poor Englishman, but he was a very skilled writer. When he came to the United States, or I should say the colonies, in 1774, he was employed quickly as the editor of the Pennsylvania Magazine. It was the biggest Whig publication in Philadelphia. And this was in a time when, the newspapers were even more partisan than they are today. There would be kind of Tory publications and Whig publications. If you think the New York Times is bad, you should see some of these Tory publications from back then, by the way. But he kind of dabbled in politics and science and various other topics. But Common Sense really became a sensation. So even just mere months after the fact that the Second Continental Congress had passed the Olive Branch petition, which called for reconciliation with Britain, Paine's saying, no, we need independence. It's not feasible for us to be represented in Parliament, even if it could be. Because, Edmund Burke actually proposed a plan to give the colonies representation in Parliament, but Paine said it's unfeasible. And not only that, it's immoral. He said that the product of the English government was founded in conquest by a bastard Frenchman in 1066, William the Conqueror, and the whole system's illegitimate. So he recommended a Declaration for Independence, he called it. So he's essentially really one of the first people calling for the United States, as it would be, to articulate the reasons for which it would leave Britain. It's secession. That's what it is. These are proto-Southern values and really the cornerstone of kind of our belief system. And he also called for what he called a continental charter. This was a prototype for a written constitution, and nothing was really more unknown to the world than a written constitution. English had dabbled in one during the English Revolution under the kind of the Commonwealth, but really there weren't written constitutions. Britain's was a series of precedents and legal traditions, etc. As you know, Carl, you've talked about that all the time. But Paine called for it in written form. So he brought all these new radical ideas to the masses that were digestible to regular people, poor tradesmen, people that weren't really inclined to the legalistic arguments that Jefferson knew,
And a written constitution, correct me if I'm wrong, but the general concept, the general idea of that was to prevent a national common law, which, oddly enough, post-Lincoln, is exactly what we've got today. And, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but in today's national common law system, what you have is the general government through its courts deciding what the limitations of its own power are to be.
Certainly so. And they rarely even reference the Constitution in many of the opinions. They reference court precedents, many of which were totally decided wrongly, right? As you well know. So, yeah, we do have something of a perverted common law type system now.
I wouldn't say several of which. I would say the overwhelming majority of which.
Yeah, we could go down the list about the most wretched and horrid. I'm sure we could have, full episodes on that, but absolutely. But Paine was saying, a just social compact was an agreement amongst individuals, but how this manifested at the time in which, there were so many people living, it was a federal republic. Paine actually wasn't so much concerned about political decentralization, I think, until later in his life, other than secession. He did view value in being united in some sense against Great Britain, and that's where he thought that America derived, many of its abilities to be victorious against England. But later in life, he thought the Federalists just screwed the pooch with the Jay Treaty and the Alien and Sedition Acts, and he totally aligned with the Jeffersonian Republicans, especially when he came back in 1802.
Hey, let me take one quick pause here, because I meant to actually do this about 4 or 5 minutes ago, but Donnie Kennedy asked, where can we get your books? Where can we find your books? And I know they're on Amazon for one.
Yeah, I will post the URL here in the comments, but just to have a question from the Kennedy twins is a great honor. I think I have The South Was Right somewhere down here. So incredible honor to be asked a question by them. But it's davidbenner.square.site. That's my site where you can purchase the books. I'll sign them. I won't put Nancy Pelosi rules. Sorry, don't request that. But or Lincoln rules. No, that's a no-go.
And if you also, if you're inclined, follow Dave on Facebook, because I try to share all of his posts. Actually, I don't, how Facebook is. I probably don't see all of them unless I go out, and consciously look for them. But anytime, he'll do kind of like what happened today in history. And anytime I see one of those pop up, it's like I don't even have to read it. I'll go ahead and share it and then come back and read it, because I know it's going to be something I did not know. So,
well, I appreciate that very much. And I echo exactly what you said earlier. If I feel like I'm a stumbling block, you're one of the smartest people on especially the Southern tradition and, America's constitutional tradition.
Well, that's big praise coming from you, because I'm not actually very intelligent. Ask Donnie Kennedy, he'll tell you.
I think the audience would dispute that.
But all right, so you brought up secession. How did Paine view that? Why was he attacked? What is secession? Number one, what is the philosophy behind it? From a philosophical point of view, and what drew Paine to adopting and advocating for that doctrine?
I think it's a few things. In Paine's mind, he viewed like a perpetual union, or in his case, a perpetual monarchy, as actually a form of slavery, believe it or not. Because what he thought was, by living under such a system, you're essentially being forced to live by the dictates of a generation that long preceded you and decided on a government you might not want any part of, a hereditary structure that would, elevate people of distinctions that didn't matter. In his case, his elites were kind of royalist nobles, right? And he also believed, just in the strict Lockean sensibilities, that when a government failed to bring about public happiness, it wasn't fit to survive. And this didn't have to mean bloodshed. It could mean a governmental reorganization. And of course, Britain was going to bring the guns. But I think the Patriots much would have rather not to fight. In fact, Paine said, I prefer peace, but if trouble may come, let it come in my time so that my children may have peace.
Yeah.
He was speaking metaphorically. He never actually had a child. I guess he technically did, but it died in childbirth along with his first wife. But he just thought that when government power expanded to violate the individual liberties of its people, it was wrong. And, the answer was secession. The word wasn't widely used in his time, but he certainly believed in the construct.
He sounds an awful lot like a Jeffersonian. So did Jefferson influence him or vice versa?
I think they absolutely influenced each other, but there's things that they had in difference too. They both were hard money warriors. Actually, one thing about Paine that's not widely known is he very much defended hard money currency in a time when that was actually very controversial, right? Because in the 1770s and 1780s, you had the Continental being printed, paper dollars. And in addition, the states printed their own bills of credit out of paper, and they became worthless. It was an inflationary disaster. And Paine wrote this tract in 1786 called The Dissertations of Civil Government. And I recommend all your audience read that. It's a lesser known Paine pamphlet, but it's just incredible. But where they differed, I think, was a little bit of kind of the proto-social welfare system that Paine concocted. And this is an inconvenient truth for people that love Paine. I'm one of them. But Paine called for essentially the first proto-income tax in Western civilization in the second part of The Rights of Man. He also called for public works projects, aid programs for the poor and the elderly. And in Agrarian Justice, the 1797 tract, he even called for a proto-UBI experiment where a land tax would be assessed on everyone's property in a community and an annual stipend given to everyone that lived in the community based upon the proceeds of that land. So Paine was in some ways a welfare state guy before it was even a thing. All these proposals fell on deaf ears and weren't really brought into being until like 150 years later by Otto von Bismarck, who really created one of the first welfare states. But, Jefferson didn't sign on to any of that. And a lot of people, just thought that this was kooky and radical, and it was. And in Paine's defense, I'll just say he didn't intend for any of this to be funded out of debt spending and fiat money printing experiments and all the egregious things we see from central banking and, the spending in Congress today. But I do think it's important people know that about Paine.
Well, economic theory at that time was at best in its infancy, and I think even Jefferson, I think some would, I know my son's history teacher, his first year in college, told him Jefferson was a socialist. And, I guess in the sense that he advocated in favor of public universities, I guess you could make that case. But overall, there was a distinction with Jefferson, and that was he was not in favor of a strong central government representing, 13 states. It was a local government that would set up a school system. And I wonder if Paine wasn't the same way, where his tendencies towards collectivism more local or more general in terms of, sweeping across the entire union.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in terms of kind of the socialist experiments, it was more toward a central government. He was proposing these schemes for England. actually at the time.
Really?
And it actually, in the same track, The Rights of Man Part 2, he also called for the total dissolution of the English monarchy, which branded him traitorous. And he was charged with seditious libel and actually tried for seditious libel and convicted. He would have been executed. He actually narrowly escaped to France at the time, where he was a huge celebrity. And, he had some influence on the early French Provisional Republic. He actually begged for the life of the king. He said that, monarchy is a villainous and evil and despotic system, but actually the current king of France at the time, Louis the 16th, wasn't particularly a bad king, and his problem wasn't with the current office holder, the current figurehead. It was a systematic evil he thought that should be kind of eradicated. And for pleading for the life of the king, he failed because he opposed people like Robespierre and Saint Just and people that wanted to kill King Louis. And it landed him in prison during the Reign of Terror, where he nearly died. But many of his plans were on a central model. But I think that he abandoned some of that when it came to the beginning of the 1800s, because when Jefferson won under the Jeffersonian Revolution of 1800, as it's somehow called, he took that as a total sign for hope. He just thought that the Federalists had destroyed, everything that the Patriots had been working toward, especially the Jay Treaty, because he, like Jefferson, was more or less a Francophile and thought that, America's natural kindred association should be to this other republic and not this cruel despotic monarchy that he was from. I went off a little bit on that, but
that was you actually brought up another question. So, being a Francophile, we talked about it earlier. A good friend of mine, Kurt, had mentioned that that he was aligned with the Jacobins, and I don't know much about Paine. I really don't. I kind of understand the philosophy. I've read Common Sense. I know that he certainly fits in with the Jeffersonian view of things, but I don't know much about him beyond that, other than what I've heard tonight now. But I'd have a hard time labeling him or Jefferson as a Jacobin, although I think that up to a point, both of them supported, at least in the early phases of the French Revolution, the overthrowing of a monarchy. Can you talk more on that?
Yeah, that's the perfect way to articulate it, actually. And some people get the wrong idea because, indeed, both Jefferson and Paine defended the French Republic and the French Revolution in general in the early phases, but in no way did Paine ever kind of endorse the violent bloodshed that was the Reign of Terror. He definitely wasn't a Jacobin. Actually, he aligned more closely with the Girondins, people like Danton and Brissot. They were kind of rivals to the Jacobins. Robespierre hated them. Robespierre thought that, he had all the wrong ideas, especially because he pled for the life of the king, but also because he kind of opposed some of Robespierre's closest confidants in unrelated matters. But it should be noted that Paine's main argument in The Rights of Man Part 1 is essentially that all people have the right to local autonomy, local self-government, and tyrannical governments were unjust. So why should we have a different opinion on what France does in terms of removing its monarchy than we would have? Because the Americans did the same thing and they were better for it, according to Paine. I think that Jefferson actually defended the French Revolution a little bit more, even after its bloodiest phases, than Paine did. But Paine got disenchanted by kind of especially the Napoleonic years, because he thought that, many of the strides had been totally lost, and France had ended up becoming a military dictatorship of sorts under Napoleon. Actually, Napoleon loved Paine at first, but they had a falling out. Napoleon famously said that he slept with a copy of The Rights of Man under his pillow, and that a statue of gold should be built to Paine in every city in the world. But after Paine concocted a scheme for the French to invade England, Paine, when presenting this plan to a council of military generals under Napoleon, suddenly, for some reason we don't know as historians, just said all of a sudden, I don't know if this invasion will work. I think we'll have to sue for peace. Napoleon just got completely enraged by him, never entertained any conversations with him again. Later, Paine would call Napoleon the most completest charlatan that ever existed, though, because he had usurped power in a coup. But that's just another side tangent.
Well, again, it sounds to me like there's a lot of commonality here between Jeffersonian thought, and I think you're right about Jefferson. He even when the aristocrats were put to death, Jefferson seemed, from what I understand, wrote sort of an endorsement of their actions.
Actually, I was reading Jefferson's letters on this just maybe 6 months ago, and at one place Jefferson says, if only an Adam and Eve were left in every city in the world, it will all have been worth it. And that's, I gotta say, like, I love Jefferson, but that's pretty ghastly, man. That and the Embargo Act don't shine well on Jefferson.
The Embargo Act, for sure. I can somewhat understand his antipathy toward monarchy, though, because the entire country, our country, had just come out of an invasion by a monarchy. So you and I are not walking in his footsteps. So I can sort of let him off the hook on that, even though, to our ears, it sounds pretty ghastly, as you said. But all right. So how much I'm curious, how much did Paine, did his writings, his philosophy, was there any of that spilled over into the South leading up to the war between the states? Were his pamphlets an influence on the South, say in the antebellum and during the war era?
Man, that is such a good question, and I didn't find much to this effect, so I can't categorically answer it. But I would say that, as you know, many of the Southern states raised the same themes as reasons for which they were leaving the Union as the reasons that the states left the British monarchy in 1776 and the years to follow. Actually, South Carolina's more incendiary secession ordinance, written by Rhett, kind of addresses this and says that basically specifically. I don't know if any of them referred to common sense or Paine in general, but many of the themes that Paine raised were certainly reminiscent of some of the arguments that were being used. And of course, the mainstream will only talk about, slavery and such when, at least 4 states don't even mention slavery in their secession ordinances. Mine doesn't, by the way. So Tennessee's complaints of, Lincoln's despotic consolidation of power and his kind of propensity to invade the South when Congress wasn't in session and draw up an army. But I don't know about the direct relationship to Paine, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, and you brought up Rhett's proclamation, and a lot of people don't even know that exists.
Exactly. I think it's by design, by the way.
It could be. Our detractors, against the South and against Southern secession and the "it's all about slavery" crowd, they don't realize that actually the first Declaration of Causes published and voted on by South Carolina was by the moderates. Rhett was the fire eater.
Yes.
Rhett was far and away a bigger fire eater than Jefferson Davis or many others were. And he, if I remember, I haven't read that proclamation in a while, but I don't think he even hardly mentioned slavery in there. It was about the economic issues and the philosophical issues. And again, I think that to me, Paine, what I know about him, he's almost like an American Locke, in that he may or may not have conceived of these ideas or these philosophies of, localism, local control, decentralized government. But I think he played a major role in bringing them to America and kind of cementing them in the minds of generations, pretty much leading up to the present day.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I do. I especially when it comes to kind of the mentality and propensity to embrace hard money currency and separation of church and state, right? Because I think that term is misused sometimes, of course.
Sure it is. Yeah.
It sure is, as you and your audience know. I know everyone here knows that. But he believed that, government shouldn't subsidize any kind of religion, and that was wrong. He believed that, the creator, there was a creator, but Paine was a deist. But nonetheless, he was an ardent advocate for religious liberty, in kind of the same way Ayn Rand was. Ayn Rand was an atheist, but she was a devout believer in separation of church and state, in the sense that they kind of meant it. Now, everyone points to that Jefferson letter and says that, a wall of separation between church and state is kind of, that's the crucial meaning of the term, but really that kind of came about through a court opinion, an Everson opinion much later. But Paine actually pointed in The Rights of Man Part 1 to colonial Virginia as kind of a golden sample for what England should follow. He said, these people divorced themselves from having, the Anglican Church be the official subsidized church where people would have to swear oaths to obtain civil office, etc. And they're better off for it. So some of his beliefs were powerful and influential, but I think that secession was the biggest one that he gave the South and gave the American experience in general, because if there's one originalist first principle that's American, it's secession. Don't let anyone tell you differently.
Yeah, and the right to self-government and decentralization. We get caught up, and I've said this I don't know how many thousands of times, but the first words of the preamble to the Constitution are not "we the people." They are "we the people of the United States," meaning we the people of Virginia, Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, so forth and so on. That's one of those things that is so misunderstood. And now if I keep talking, we're going to get into your book on the 14th Amendment when it comes to the Bill of Rights being applied against the states. But would Paine have talk about what I was just saying when we say we the people of Virginia? Would Paine have taken the Yankee view that one American nation, one monolithic group of people ratified the Constitution, or the people, as Madison said, acting through their respective states? Which one of those would Paine mostly have approved of?
Well, I will say Paine understood that it was a federal republic, but he thought that much of the strength of that federal republic was derived by the center, by the fact that it was the United States, for better or worse. But
strength in what way? In terms of defense? In terms of
he thought in terms of defense. He thought, united we stand, divided we fall, whatever. In that way, I think he actually embraced something of a proto-Yankee sensibility. But I will say too that he was overseas when the Constitution was being ratified. He bounced between France and Britain in those years, actually trying to sell his iron bridge. He was a brilliant engineer, by the way, another fact that isn't known about him. But we don't know much about what he thought about the Constitution, other than that he weighed in on some ways, and for the same reasons that Jefferson did in his correspondence with Madison toward the end of 1787. He thought that there should be term limits for the executive and that all people were entitled to a Bill of Rights. Those were essentially Jefferson's two qualms as well.
Sure.
But Paine didn't really meddle with American politics for the most part. He had intended to retire from politics and become a lifelong bridge builder. And it was only the French Revolution, and particularly Burke's opinion on it, Edmund Burke, that drove him back into politics. And I think that he got really disenchanted by that united American vision by the end of his life. He favored the Jeffersonians in almost everything after he came back, and the Federalists just despised him. He actually ended his friendship with George Washington because he believed that George Washington was responsible for his harsh treatment in French prison and didn't do anything to press his claim of American citizenship, which would have been an impetus for him to be released. And I think in some ways he was right. I don't know if it was Jefferson or Washington himself, but Washington's subordinate, the minister to France at the time, Gouverneur Morris, not only didn't press Paine's case with the government, but actually seemed to revel in the fact that he would be punished. So he lost some friends over that, including some of the biggest name Federalists. And I think he ended up being on the right side of things in the end. So,
well, going back to what you said earlier about he believed in a strong federal center, so did a lot of Southerners. You know, you had in South Carolina, Mel Bradford wrote years ago, I remember reading that you could say that South Carolina ratified the United States Constitution in 1781 when Lord Cornwallis's troops landed in Charleston. Because when you read the South Carolina ratifying convention, you had, stalwarts, I mean, honorable men, but like Pierce Butler and Rutledge and Charles Cotesworth Pinckney arguing in favor of a strong central government, so to speak, for the purpose of common defense. But when they spoke of a strong central government, they didn't mean it in the terms that we think of today, where we need the government to tell you, don't even get me started on that. But, how much sugar can be in your corn, it's gone way, way, way above. I mean, I've kind of somewhat jokingly made the point, I think even Hamilton would be horrified.
I mean, relatively speaking, exactly. I mean, you look at what Hamilton and Gouverneur Morris wanted and Rutledge and, some of those fine gentlemen wanted. It's just like that was big government back then, but it's not even a candle to what it is today. But the precedents, that's the issue, though. The precedents they left upon us were built upon and taken advantage of by ambitious tyrants like Lincoln and, Woodrow Wilson and FDR beyond their time.
Yeah. And it goes back to, I would submit that, the catalyst for the progressive era and I which I say we're still in, I believe we have never actually left the progressive era. And the founding father of the progressive era was Lincoln. And I don't think Paine would have agreed with anything that Lincoln stood for. I know Jefferson wouldn't. And based on, what I'm hearing tonight, I don't think Paine would have either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Franklin Pierce was the Jeffersonian progenitor of his time that really butted heads with Lincoln in a really serious way. And he carried kind of the values that Jefferson and Paine stood for in terms of government and tyranny and what it means to raise a standing army against your own people. It was unfathomable. And in fact, during the Philadelphia Convention, Madison remarked about how unfathomable that would be. Right. So
if I remember correctly, Madison said that alone would have dissolved the Union.
Yeah, he did. He did. Yeah. It's hard to get more clear than that, right? But
even Hamilton called it the maddest project ever devised, to march the troops of one state into the bosom of another, and said, what sensible man could be well disposed towards a government that held itself together only by the sword? And I'm going off of memory, so I may have mangled his words a little bit, but
that's incredible.
It's Hamilton, there's a lot of them. I'm not a Hamilton fan for the reasons that you're not, but it has always fascinated me that even Hamilton was speaking against Lincoln, 70 years before Lincoln materialized. And I have to think based on what you're telling me tonight that had Paine, good Lord willing, been alive during the 1860s, he might have had the influence to curtail some of what the South suffered at the hands of Lincoln.
He believed all people that were roused to unhappiness over their government had the right to alter and abolish it. It doesn't get more simple than that, and that's what the Southerners were looking for. And
Unhappiness for any reason, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, all right, brother. And by the way, I'm going to make a suggestion for your next book, because I know you've mentioned Franklin Pierce to me a number of times over the years. I know you're an admirer of his. I don't know much about him. You ought to write a book on him.
New Hampshire doughface. He's a man after my own heart.
Another Jeffersonian, right?
Absolutely. I feature him quite prominently in Compact of the Republic because, he really took a kind of hands-off approach to government, and he thought that the executive was, the Jeffersonian model, someone that was not kind of the chief legislature, someone that kind of brought the legislature's will into effect and forced the law to the very constrained and limiting things that the Constitution demanded. And it wasn't supposed to be some kind of ambitious Caesar that would, bring people what they wanted. Pierce is a great figure that people don't know enough about. I really recommend Peter Wallner's book on Pierce called Martyr of the Union. It's actually really good, but there's more room in the historiography for Pierce.
I think our Ryan Walters, don't you?
Oh yeah, Brian's great.
Ryan, he mentioned he wrote books last year actually on Cleveland and Harding. Harding, and mentions how they always fall well down towards the bottom on the presidential rankings. Where does Pierce wind up in that?
Oh, Pierce is top 10 for me, but
I'm talking about, according to the liberal academics,
he's always bottom 5. John Tyler, Pierce, Cleveland all seem to be like floating around in that bottom 5. It's just reason to give you pause about why some of these polls end up the way they do.
When FDR's in the top 3, that generally tells you got to invert the presidential rankings. Tyler's another one, I'm sure, that winds up in the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, even James Buchanan, I have some issues with James Buchanan, but I think he's pretty darn good. He didn't want to go to war over secession. That's good enough for me.
Somebody wrote an article, it may have been Brian McClanahan. It may have been Brian that wrote the article that why did Buchanan not invade the South? Why did Lincoln have to do it? Half quotes, because Buchanan did all he was allowed to do under the Constitution. And, it was Lincoln that violated the Constitution with his entire cabinet telling him, I got to tell you funny when you get a laugh out of this. I was explaining this to my oldest son, Sam, and, that his entire cabinet had advised him that if you send resupply ships into Charleston Harbor, you will inaugurate a civil war. And Sam said, they all said that? I said, well, his postmaster general actually advocated sending them in. And Sam looked at me. He was about 13 years old at the time, and incredulously looked at me and said, you mean he went to war based on the advice of his mailman?
Yeah, that says it all, right? But it's actually crazy to think about, because it was probably upon that advice that he did inaugurate war. He did resupply Sumter.
I think he was just looking for justification for an idea that he'd already decided on, honestly.
Exactly. And he had to have known from the Star of the West incident, the cadets from the Citadel firing upon the Star of the West, and what the South Carolina government had told him in explicit terms. That's exactly what it would have done. And if you look at Lincoln's kind of journal that was kind of captured by his friend Orville, gosh, what's his last name?
Brownlow, wasn't it? Or was it Brown?
Orville Brown. I mean, Lincoln admitted this in explicit terms to a man he was on very good terms with and captured in a firsthand account. So he said Sumter did more than it otherwise would have.
Never could have. Yeah. He admitted it was a meaningless fort, and he'd already had his mind made up. I know we're off of when we get into Lincoln, we're kind of off of Paine now, but would you agree with me that Sumter went forward to serve as a model for virtually every war that we've entered to since?
Oh, yeah. I guess I haven't even thought about it that way. But yeah, it does kind of seem like a lot of the wars that the U.S. has gotten involved with, there has to kind of be that watershed moment that you can use to justify it. Um, just thinking of some other episodes, like, man, I'm just trying to think of some others.
Well, the Maine, the Lusitania, it can very well be established that Roosevelt intentionally provoked the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Tonkin Gulf affair. If that wasn't Lincolnian, I don't know what was. Get on up into Iraq. I mean, it's and the excuse for a lot of this is, well, Lincoln did it. Lincoln, again. What did you say right out of the starting gate? Precedent.
Yeah, precedence will spell the end of a republic. Bad precedents will, and Paine knew that. Jefferson knew that. The kind of the smartest men of the Southern tradition all knew that, and we're living it right now. Because the bad precedents have gotten worse and worse when it comes to the welfare state, the surveillance apparatus, U.S. foreign policy, the consolidation of power in the central government. All of those things these men dreaded have come to be.
I've often made and we'll kind of summarize and fade out on this, but I've often made the statement that if you want to really get down to what the Southern soldier fought for in the years between 1861 and 1865, they fought to prevent what we have today.
Yeah, and to protect their homes, man. Even McPherson will say this, right? If you look at James McPherson and what he wrote about the reasons for which men fought, it's much more close to home than some kind of grandstand against slavery. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I'm talking about to prevent the rise of a central government. I think that I wouldn't make the argument that the average Confederate soldier understood government, that he was an expert in civics and that sort of thing, or they had memorized the Constitution, or was, some expert in Jeffersonian philosophy or anything of that nature. But I do think that he understood the concept that the people of another state have no right to come in here to my state and tell us, how we must conduct ourselves. And in that sense, and I think there were some leaders higher up, like Lee and Davis and Jubal Early and various others, that understood, we're fighting against a complete, a consolidation of power. I mean, Lee in his correspondence with Lord Acton spelled that out, the consolidation of the states into one vast republic, sure to be aggressive abroad and despotic at home, will be the precursor of that ruination that overwhelmed all that preceded it. And again, I probably butchered that quote because I'm going on memory, but that is going to be fairly close to it. So, I think there were a lot of higher ups that understood it. And again, you do sort of hear a little bit of Thomas Paine and a lot of Jefferson in the arguments against, this national consolidated Leviathan that it turned into. So,
and part of it was natural on Paine's part because he wrote in a deliberately colloquial style. His style was considered vulgarity. That's what it was called, but it's not to be meant to be profane, although sometimes he was. But the vulgar style was an irreverent style, a way that commoners spoke that aristocrats didn't really adhere to very much. It'd be like the kind of style that you speak to your friends or construction workers speak like on the job site. It wasn't the kind of, highbrow corporate mentality. And I think that kind of naturally leads itself to opposing the elites. And the elites of Paine's day were, noble royalists.
Well, I'll tell you something. Since you have educated me a lot tonight, and many, many times over the years, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to educate you. I'm going to tell you something that you may not know.
Please.
Again, everybody listening, I'm telling you, Dave is he's one of my go-to guys. Well, if I get stumped on a question, he's one of the guys. So now I finally get to tell him something that he doesn't know. He might know it, all right, but I was watching a interview with Jimmy Vaughn. You know who Jimmy is?
I don't actually.
A lead guitar player for the Fabulous Thunderbirds, and he was Stevie Ray Vaughan's brother. Okay, and he was a big Ron Paul supporter in the 08 and 2012 elections. And somebody caught him backstage at a Ron Paul rally which he played at, and asked him, "How did you become a Ron Paul supporter?" And he said, "Well, you know, I never really grew up thinking much about politics, but one day I got a hold of a book by a guy named Thomas Paine called Common Sense."
That's pretty awesome.
So your guy, the subject of your book there, is influential up until the present day.
That's incredible, but it makes sense. I mean, Paine influenced a lot of people. Thomas Edison was a huge fan of Paine. People from all political stripes quote Paine. Everyone tries to claim a piece of him, and I actually think they're mostly right about that. There's pieces of Paine that are really admirable, and there's pieces of him that I take issue with. But if he was standing in front of me, I would walk up to him and shake his hand and compliment him on a job well done. But that's not to say that this account is laudatory. I actually criticized Paine and some of what he thought, but I did think it was important to articulate what he thought in the way he thought it, despite my own political beliefs and sensibilities. I think that I really tried to do that.
Well, and I'm sure you did. I mean, you know, I've never known you to be anything other than just 100% objective. And one of the things I'll tell you, you know, is, that makes me an admirer of your writings is that you seem to just kind of lay things out the way they are without regard to, you know, to emotion. And that's a good thing. I mean, there was only one perfect human who ever walked the face of the earth. You know, we can talk about anybody on the, you know, throughout history that we admire and still admit that they had flaws. You know, I'm not aware of anybody, even Washington, even Jefferson, even Franklin, that didn't have flaws. That doesn't mean that they were wrong in general, or it doesn't mean that their entire philosophy or their entire outlook on life or worldview must be discounted. And Paine's no different than that. You know, everybody was flawed. What we have to do is pick out the best parts of these people and use it to our own benefit. And so, to me, that's the benefit of somebody like you that can approach history from an objective point of view and put it out there for the rest of us to benefit from. And I applaud you for that. And, and again, everybody out there, we're going to close out here, but Dave Benner, you can look him up on Facebook. He writes some great stuff on there as well. And tell us once again, Dave, where can we find the books? I know you can get them on Amazon, probably Barnes and Noble, I'm assuming.
I'm not sure about Barnes and Noble, definitely Amazon, but I prefer that people get it from davidbenner.square.site. That's my store page. I also contribute to the 10th Amendment Center and the Mises Institute at times, and davebenner.com is my website. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate your organization. I've had the best of times being invited to speak at SCV events, and the Southern heritage and tradition deserves to be preserved, and you guys are doing that better than anyone. So
we appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much for being on, and we'll have you on again. I host the third Monday of every month, so don't be shocked if I'm hitting you up again here in a few months.
Please do it, and thanks again, man. I really appreciate it, Carl. You're a great man, and I hope to talk to you soon.
All right, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, what an awesome show. We're going to end it real quick. Remember to share this episode and tune in for Look Around the Confederation this Thursday at 7 p.m. Confederate Standard Time. And to please send in your news, short videos or write-ups to scvyouthOutreach@gmail.com. You can go support Mr. Dave Benner's page or his books and get one at the link that is in the chat at www.davidbenner.square.site. And, of course, go support him on his Facebook page and his website. Definitely piqued my interest on a lot of stuff tonight. I, at one point, just stopped taking notes and just decided I was going to have to rewatch this episode again. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching. And remember, no Fumar in the elevator and Rare Frop.
Rare Frop.